And I will call this meeting to order. It is Mount St. Helens Eruption Day, May 18th, for the Water Environment Services Advisory Committee. And this is going to be our Budget Committee meeting tonight. So, Chris, can you call the roll, please?
Yes. Christopher Bowker.
Here.
Richard Craven. I've seen him on. Greg DiLoretto.
Here.
Anthony Fields. No. Councillor Goloby. Diana Hill.
Here.
Brian Johnson.
Here.
Roseanne Johnson. Here. Councillor Khosrabadi.
Here.
Preston Korst.
He's going to be late.
I thought I saw him. I see him.
I am actually here, but I'm in transport. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Dedication. I love it. Mayor Milch.
Here.
Catherine Miller.
Here.
Michael Morrow.
Here.
Neil Schulman.
Here.
We have quorum.
Wonderful. And just for everyone's information too, excused absences tonight are Mayor McGriff, William, Renee, Rita, and Mary. And thank you, Preston, for being en route. And hopefully you'll be able to join us with video here shortly. So with that, I'm going to turn it right over to Greg.
Right. Thank you, Chair Helm. I mentioned earlier that we met with Mayor McGriff, who's on the Budget Committee, and she just submitted some questions about 515 today. Both Aaron and I got back to her saying that we think we'll cover them through this presentation tonight, and we will, since she's not here, we'll get that to her as soon as possible. Just wanted to thank Preston and Diana. We finally brought the rules and regulations home after a severe effort. And like I've told my staff, this is other than what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is the harmonization of rates. It was the last big piece of the puzzle in the regionalization and the 190 partnership that was approved back in late 2015, early 2016. So that was a huge accomplishment. Thanks to Ron and his staff, and just, yeah, very well done. Chris, can you bring up the slides? We've had a very busy week, but kind of a fun week. So I just wanted to share, we had a green roof tour yesterday at our Tri-City facility, and that was with the Green Roof Think Tank, which is a coalition of businesses, nonprofits, and government folks looking to advocate for and find good ways to use green roof in the region. Diana was there, Greg was there, Michael was there, Mayor McGriff was there, and we also had Dan Fowler, who's the former mayor of Oregon City there. So good time had by all. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it, but as you can see, there's lots of people walking around on our green roof at our Tri-City facility. Next slide. And then today we had our kickoff of our Solve Summer Waterways Cleanup event. This is the 5th year that we've been working with Solve on doing these regional summer waterway cleanup events. Today was at Meldrum Bar in Gladstone, which was wonderful. And yeah, had a good time. I found a bike, and I found an old ratty lawn chair. Yeah, good time. Oh, I forgot to mention, for Councillor Khosrabadi, we also had at the Green Roof event, there was 3 staff from the city of Milwaukee in attendance. So thank you for that. And that's the end of my remarks for tonight. It's all budget now, and Shelley.
Right, but first we're going to approve the March meeting minutes by consensus. So if everyone would give me a thumbs up on the video, that would be great. If you're not, and if you're not on video, that's fine. If there's any issues with it, just let me know. But it looks like March meeting minutes are approved. Chris, do we have anyone on for public comment tonight?
Let me see. I don't see anybody on from the public, so I think we do not.
All righty. Well, good. Then we're going to turn it right over to Erin for the budget presentation.
All right, thank you, Chair Helm. I think Chris is going to be navigating for me. Thanks, Chris. So we're excited to be presenting WES's proposed budget for your review tonight. In finance, there's a joke that half of our year is audit and half is budget. Budget is by far my favorite half. It's inherently hopeful and it articulates how we're going to accomplish our mission and realize our vision with the resources that we get from ratepayer funds. So Chris, if you could go to the next slide, please. In tonight's presentation, we'll briefly cover the budget process, then walk through the proposed budget for next fiscal year in detail, including major themes, operating capital and debt service budgets, and then summarize WES's long-range financial plan and finish with next steps. We're going to be covering a lot of information and some of it will go fairly quickly to allow time for questions at the end and to ensure that we get through the entire presentation. If anyone has questions as we go along, please feel free to ask and I'll pause and we can address those. Before we get started though, I wanted to acknowledge and thank the advisory committee members who've already submitted questions. Greg DiLoretto and Christopher Bowker both sent in great lists of questions earlier this week that we've responded to. I think we'll be covering the answers to most of those in tonight's presentation. If there's any that we don't touch on though, we can discuss those at the end. And then as Greg mentioned, Mayor McGriff also just submitted a list of questions that I think we'll be touching on as well. We met with William Gifford last week since he wasn't able to attend due to a conflict. And he had some input that we'll be incorporating into tonight's presentation as well. Next slide, please. One of the most important purposes for budgeting in local government is that it provides an opportunity for citizen involvement. And this is one of those opportunities. This is actually a key milestone in the development of the budget where we gather stakeholder input. This meeting is an opportunity to review the budget and provide feedback that will be shared with the Budget Committee on Monday when we have that meeting. At the end of this evening's presentation, we'll be seeking a motion to advance the proposed budget as presented to the Budget Committee meeting on Monday. I wanted to note, though, that for compliance with Oregon budget law, the budget cannot be revised in the context of this meeting. Only the Budget Committee can revise the budget. But any recommendations from the Advisory Committee as a whole will be shared with the Budget Committee when we present it to them next Monday. Next slide, please. There are no surprises in the proposed budget, and a lot of what we talk about tonight will likely sound very familiar because the work that we've done with this committee over the last 2 years has laid the foundation for the budget that we're presenting. WES's budget incorporates our various planning, policy, and strategic efforts, including our 5-year capital improvement plan, which serves as the basis for the proposed capital budget. The Surface Water Master Plan, which was just approved last October and is serving as the basis for the proposed surface water capital budget. The long-term financial strategy recommended by the Advisory Committee in March of 2022. Key points of that strategy are that it achieves full funding of our CIP while also meeting all operating and debt service requirements and achieving sewer rate harmonization so that all customers pay the same for the services they receive regardless of where they live within WES's service area. And we'll be covering rate harmonization in more detail tonight, as Greg shared. The budget also incorporates financial policies, the most significant of which are WES's reserve and debt management policies, which were presented to the Advisory Committee in 2022 and officially adopted by the board in October for debt policy. Budget policies outside of their debt policy and reserves ensure that we adhere to statutory requirements for Oregon local budget law and align with best practices in utility financial management. Next slide, please. WES's strategic planning is interwoven into the budget and reflected via requests for resources to enable programs to meet initiatives and results. Specifically, we have resources in this next year's budget to implement the plan update that we shared with the Advisory Committee in January. And then finally, the budget includes various financial and economic inputs, which we previewed with the advisory committee in March, including operating cost increases for labor and county internal services, increases in the construction cost index, which impact both our capital budget and are used as the index for system development charge rate proposals, surface area growth estimates from a recently completed population study, and our long-range planning assumptions. Next slide, please. This slide is really more educational and just included to provide some context around the flow of WES's funds and primary sources and uses. So in compliance with Oregon local budget law, WES's budget is prepared and adopted by funds. The fund structure that we have allows us to segregate separate funding streams for sewer and surface water and to further segregate resources and requirements by specific activities and objectives or revenue sources that are restricted, as in the case of the system development charge funds. Sanitary sewer resources are segregated from surface water through 3 different funds for each: operating, construction, and system development charge, as you can see on the table here. All monthly service charges are received into the operating funds, where they're used first to meet ongoing operating and maintenance expenses, as well as transfers to the debt service fund to pay for debt payments, principal and interest, and transfers to the construction fund for cash funding of asset replacement and renewal and new construction. And they also meet reserve requirements as those requirements go up. The debt service fund receives transfers in from the operating and system development charge funds, as well as premiums from new debt issuances. Any uses in the debt service fund are for principal and interest on long-term debt. Any money that moves between these funds is budgeted as a transfer for transparency and just administrative efficiency. Next slide, please. WES's service area is divided into 3 rate zones that correspond with the different services provided and levels of services provided within those rate zones. In rate zones 1 and 2, WES provides regional wastewater treatment services. The cities in rate zone 1 have their own local collection systems and charge a separate fee for local collection. In rate zone 2, WES also provides wastewater local collection services to the city of Happy Valley and unincorporated areas of North Clackamas. In rate zone 2A, WES provides wholesale wastewater treatment, which is no collection, to the cities of Milwaukee and Johnson City. And in rate zone 3, WES provides surface water management services only to a small population. Surface water management is also provided to ratepayers in rate zone 2. An important distinction between rate zones 1 and 2 is the inclusion of a legacy debt component that is related to debt that was incurred by Clackamas County Service District 1 before the WES partnership was formed. That inclusion of that component creates a disparity between rate zone 1 and 2's rates for the same sewer services of about $11.40 per month. When we talk about rate harmonization, we're talking about phasing that component out so that the services for the primary, our primary service rates will be the same. Next slide, please. As mentioned, an updated population study was completed in December 2022, which projected continued growth of about 1% annually in WES's service area. We'll need increased capacity in our systems to meet the needs of those new customers. The photos on the left of this slide are actual photos from the 80s. They're not current photos that we've applied a fancy filter to. Of the Tri-City plant's original construction. We just unearthed about 120 rolls of original film from that construction and are looking forward to digitizing it. But it kind of serves to illustrate how old WES's infrastructure is. A lot of it was originally constructed in the 70s and 80s. Quite a bit of it was funded with federal grants. And we're now facing aging infrastructure that needs renewal and replacement. In addition to the capital needs, the last 2 years have seen record-breaking inflation and ongoing cost pressures are impacting our operating budgets. And then finally, we seek to balance our response to those issues while also maintaining affordable rates. And that balance is one of the objectives that our financial strategy that the advisory committee approved of achieves, as we think that we'll be discussing further in this presentation. Next slide, please. So how the budget addresses those issues that we just saw and achieves that balance is up through a proposal for increased capital spending of just over 52 million. 4.7 million of that is directed towards the regional influent infiltration cost share funding agreement. We're also proposing 2 new engineering positions to support project delivery and implementation of our CIP. In order to provide services in the most cost-effective manner, one of the constraints in our long-range planning is that operating cost increases are below 5% each year. The proposed budget projects a 3.3% increase in materials and services, thanks to hard work on WES's staff's part to reduce the operating budget and offset some of the increases that we were seeing in labor as well as county allocated costs. We're able to propose a reduction in debt service this year, thanks to lower interest on the Tri-City Solids Handling Loan. We're always looking for opportunities to have synergies between our sewer and surface water services, and this is one of those opportunities that we realized. WES's participation in the DEQ sponsorship loan option program was exercised through taking out a loan for the Three Creeks project. Taking that loan out enabled us to get a promotional rate of interest on the sewer Tri-City Solids Handling Loan and save about $4 million over the term of the debt. So that's an instance where the 2 service programs working together, surface water and sewer, can really benefit each other kind of indirectly. And then last, the long-term financial stability is necessary in planning to ensure that we can continue to deliver services for the foreseeable future. And that requires that we budget to keep rates reasonable and predictable. The rates that we're proposing tonight are aligned with prior year projections and advisory committee guidance. They also achieve the rate harmonization target that we're aiming towards. And they continue to ensure that WES has strong debt coverage and maintains reserves so that we have resources available for unforeseen expenses should they arise, as well as the capacity to issue debt when we need to. Next slide, please. So what does all that mean in terms of dollars? It means WES's total proposed budget for next year is 288.9 million, which is a really large number. A lot of that number doesn't actually represent expenditures, as we'll be walking through over the next few slides. The major resource components of WES's budget consist of beginning fund balance, which are funds that we expect to end this fiscal year with and carry forward to the next fiscal year. Revenues, which are monthly service charges, system development charges, and other revenues for fees such as development fees. Financing from a state loan represented by the other financing sources sliced on this pie, and interfund transfers, which again are used to move money between funds. On the requirement side, the major requirements include expenditures for capital outlay, materials and services, debt service, and special payments. Contingencies, which provide for unforeseen or unexpected occurrences. Transfers, again, made to share resources between funds, and then reserves, which are what we won't be spending next year and what we anticipate ending next year with. Those reserves will serve as a resource for future capital outlay, as well as to provide operating contingency for future years. Over the next several slides, we'll be walking through each of the major components of the budget that you see on these pie charts. And the pie charts will follow us in miniature on the following slides, just to kind of link us back to the total budget and show the relative proportion. Next slide, please.
Hey, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, can you go back to slide 7? Oh, no, it wasn't. Maybe it was 8. Oh, I don't know what it was. Never mind. Okay.
Oh,
I'll figure it out later.
okay. If you think of it, just
NVP.
let me know.
Stop me.
All right. So there's the small pie that's going to follow us around for a while. Beginning fund balance is, as you can see, the largest component of WES's budget at $193.4 million. More than 171 million of that is in construction and system development charge, or SDC funds, where those balances will be used for current and future year capital outlay. We last issued debt in 2021, and we're anticipating beginning this next year with $31 million of unspent proceeds. You can see the gray area of the sanitary sewer construction fund chart represents those unspent proceeds. And that's where most of the funding for this next year's proposed capital budget will come from, those existing proceeds, which we actually need to spend in compliance with debt covenants. The beginning fund balance in the debt service fund is just under $7 million. That resource includes the remaining premium from the Series 2021 debt issue, and we'll be using that to pay current and future year principal and interest on the related Series 2021 debt to realize the effective interest rate of 0.84% on that financing. The remaining $15 million is in WES's operating funds, where those resources ensure adequate cash flow until new year revenues come in. WES's existing beginning fund balance and reserves have been intentionally built over the last several years to support the substantial anticipated capital investment. It also ensures that requirements can be met with reasonable and predictable rate increases, as we'll see a little bit later on our long-term financial planning slide. Next slide, please. So continuing to the next part of the resource chart, total revenue for next fiscal year is budgeted to increase by 8%, or approximately $4.7 million, to a total of $62.3 million, which is comprised of sewer revenues of $55 million and surface water revenues of $7.3 million. As depicted in the bar chart on the slide, the majority of WES's revenue, more than 90%, is from monthly charges for sewer and surface water services and system development charges for new connections to the system. Sewer charges are projected to increase just under 5% as a result of growth in the service area and moderate increases to rates. Surface water charges are projected to increase just over 7%, again as a result of moderate increases and projected growth in the service area. Budgeted SDCs reflect a conservative growth estimate of that 1%, which equates to about 860 new connections, with 520 of those in rate zone 2 and 240 of those in rate zone 1. Proposed rate increases for system development charges have been factored into the budgeted service charge revenue and SDC revenue on this slide. Other revenue sources include minor revenues, as well as city right-of-way fees, assessment principal and interest collections, and interest income, which is the majority of the other revenue sources. The line chart on the bottom of this slide shows our interest rates in the local government investment pool, where a large majority of WES's funds are invested, as are many other municipalities' funds in Oregon. From late 2019 to early 2022, those rates decreased, and as a result, WES's interest income also decreased. Since March 2022, those rates have been going up in response to the Federal Reserve's adjustments to market interest rates. And we're projecting an increase of $1.6 million in interest income as a result. Next slide, please. This next resource, transfers, are also a requirement, and we'll start to move into the requirement side of WES's budget after this one. So transfers equal each other in terms of absolute dollars. They don't represent an expense. It's really just how we move money between funds, and kind of similar to how you might make a transfer from your checking to your savings account. WES's transfers budgeted for next fiscal year reflect movement of money from the operating funds to the construction funds to act as a resource for current and future capital outlay, as well as a transfer from the system development charge fund to the debt service fund, which reflects the strategy to use system development charges to pay for eligible debt service, and a small transfer from the sewer operating fund to the debt service fund to pay for the non-SDC eligible debt service next year. Budgeted transfers are decreasing due to a decrease in debt service, as well as utilization of the debt service funds reserve to cover a portion of the Series 2021 interest and principal payments. Next slide, please. Continuing into budget requirements, this slide shows the total combined budget for expenses. So this is what we actually are proposing to spend next year. $97.2 million, of which the majority is capital outlay. And capital outlay is reflective of a $21.4 million or 70% increase from the current year's budget. That's shown on this slide. The major driver of that increase is we're moving into more construction from design and are commencing several major projects, as we'll be sharing. Materials and services consisting of labor as well as other materials and services such as supplies and utilities is broken down on this chart. So you can see the relative increase in each component. The other category we were able to achieve a lower increase in thanks to offsets. The total increase in materials and services is about $1 million or 3.3%. As we mentioned, that service is actually decreasing next year. Special payments, which reflect the budget for right-of-way surcharges, as well as Good Neighbor Fund contributions, is increasing just by $35,000. And that's due to increases in the rates, in the revenues that right-of-way surcharges are charged on.
Hey, Erin.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted you to maybe dive a little deeper into the materials and services increase. The county as a whole, their material and services increased 12.9%, I think, in their proposed budget. And I'm very proud for a lot of reasons that ours is 3.3%. Erin, can you expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. Actually, Chris, if you could go to the next slide, I think we have a bit of, so this breaks our materials and services budget down into the major cost components. Labor increased by 4.3% and other county services increased by 26.7%. Those were the big drivers. And those were increases that were beyond our control. Without even considering the new positions, our labor increase this year was about $800,000. We also had to factor in a county internal services cost increase of $630,000. That was the result of the county updating their cost allocation plan and allocating more of the costs of internal services out to the operating departments such as WES. So those were huge increases and had an impact to our budget. And you can see almost all of the other components are decreasing. So we were able to offset a lot of the increases beyond our control through reduced discretionary spending, which is reflected in the reduced budget for professional services, vacancy considerations, which is where we're anticipating filling some vacancies later in the year, as well as incorporating a frictional vacancy rate, which is a new item in WES's budget. Neil.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I can wait till you get to the end of the slide.
Okay, cool. I didn't want to, I'm not always looking at people, but since I saw you raise your hand, I wanted to respond. We're incorporating a frictional vacancy rate this year that acknowledges both the timing of the hiring process as well as unexpected vacancies that can arise during the year, resulting from internal promotions or unanticipated retirements or other transitions. And that was really helpful in offsetting a portion of the labor increases. And then lastly, management took a real hard look at line items and tried to align the budget requests more accurately with prior year actual spending and get rid of some of the contingencies that were embedded in line items so that we're going to rely more on the overall contingency in the budget for any unexpected expenses. Utilities and supplies. You may be scratching your head looking at those decreases because everyone or most of you have probably heard that utilities has been increasing for the last 2 years, and chemical cost increases have had a major impact on the water industry. With respect to utilities, WES's use of electricity has actually gone down thanks to the cogeneration engine output, offsetting a portion of the electricity use at the Tri-City plant, about 15% for the first quarter of the calendar year, as well as participation in strategic energy management programs that have helped to reduce energy use by another 5%. So while those costs are increasing, Savings have been realized through reduced use. In the supplies budget, chemical costs, we were really cautious last year as we were seeing some pretty dramatic and frequent cost increases in chemicals. The cost increase for one of WES's chemicals was over 70% from 2021 to 2023. So we were anticipating those increases would continue and cautiously budgeted a lot for chemicals. Thankfully, those costs have started to plateau, and we will be underspending our chemicals budget this year. So we're able to budget a slight reduction in the supplies budget this next year. It still reflects an increase from our actual expenditures, but because our budget was so conservative, it's going to be a decrease from last year's budget. Greg, did you have other thoughts on the operating costs that you wanted to?
No.
Okay.
We can get to Neil's question.
Okay, awesome. Neil.
Well, I kind of have two questions, one of which is if you can get to a 3.3% operating cost increase in this environment, you can come over to the Watershed Council anytime. But the question I have is, I guess, less about is really just more of a question. What's your assessment? Obviously, achieving that is impressive in this environment. What is your assessment of like how much work is being kicked down the road because of this, or how much is it creating the potential for a future capacity issue that the district will face in the future?
I'll let Aaron follow up, but to me, it's a story of let's find the efficiencies where we can find them. Like she mentioned about supplies, chemicals. We have always been pretty conservative about we don't want to go over budget, right? And we were seeing some troubling signs last year and accommodated that. And it's really reading not the market, but finding efficiencies within our operating assumptions. And like with utilities, we're definitely making progress with our SEM, strategic energy management, and the additional power that we're getting from the cogen. So I don't see any downside long term. We're just becoming more lean. I think any organization, as we build budgets, we have contingencies and reserves, and we're tightening our belts, so to speak, is what I see. And we can't do that forever, but we're doing it now, and it seems to be working. And I don't see a downside to it long term. Anything to add, Aaron?
I think you covered it really well. I'll note that the frictional vacancy consideration lever is one that we can kind of only pull once. We can pull it harder next year or in future years, but it's really like something that we'll have to move forward incorporating into the budget to avoid having a larger increase in a future year. And Greg DiLoretto actually asked a related question to this about, how is the work getting done with all of the current vacancies that WES is experiencing? And the answer is some of it isn't getting done. And we also have overtime costs that are up about 28% compared to last year. So we do expect to fill our vacancies this next year, so that, some of the work that's been set aside or deferred can become a priority again with that additional staffing. And that's mostly in the field operations and maintenance program. If you look in the budget in the performance clackamas section, you can kind of read the performance summaries, and you'll note that catch basin cleaning is a little bit lower than our target, and that's due to staffing constraints.
And if I can just shout out to Aaron a little bit, the frictional vacancy concept was her idea through her travels and research and things like that. And typically, what we would do and what virtually everyone in the public sector does is assume, we have this amount of vacancies and we will fill them in Q2 or Q3 or Q4 or Q1. But that's fine. But the fact is we constantly have folks that leave for whatever reason, retire, And so there is a underlying consistent, as Aaron would say, frictional vacancy rate that we're always going to have. We may have our full FTE count for a day in a year, but it's not going to be constant. And so that was just an area where we can trim the fat, so to speak, and more accurately budget. And that certainly helped this year. But like she said, it's a one-time thing. We're going to continue to do it. And I think it's going to make our budgeting more accurate.
Thanks, Greg. All right, next slide, please. So diving a little bit deeper into the operating budget, WES's operating budget is divided into lines of business, 4 different lines of business, and then 11 different underlying programs. And each of those programs projects the expenses that they'll need to carry out their program services for the next year, as well as the staffing resources that they'll need. So more than half of WES's budget, or about 54 cents out of every dollar of the operating budget, is directed towards the operations line of business, which houses the plant operations and maintenance program, the field operations and maintenance program, and our resource recovery program. 20 cents of WES's budget is directed towards business services, which provide for administrative services, financial management, and account services. 17 cents is directed towards environmental services, which include permitting services, environmental services that include WES's water quality lab and watershed protection. And the last 9 cents is directed at the operating side of the capital planning and management line of business, which includes our asset management programs and capital delivery, but operating only for capital delivery. The FTE count, or full-time equivalent count, on this slide excludes the capitalized labor of 7.42 positions and only shows the 11 FTEs for capital planning and management that are included in the operating budget. Next slide, please. So changes in full-time equivalents that we'll see on these next 4 slides are common due to shifts in staffing resources between lines of business, and some are due, as we'll see on the capital delivery slide, to new positions, but the FTE shift here is just due to positions staffing moving from other lines of business into the operations program. The reduction in chemicals and supplies that we talked about a little bit earlier is in the operations program. So that's why we're seeing the decrease in materials and services. We're seeing an increase in personnel services as a result of that movement of positions into this line of business, as well as just the 4.5% overall increase in personnel costs for next year. Major initiatives include continuing the proactive maintenance of facilities, which saves WES money in the long run. Over reactive maintenance, achieving targets for pipe inspection and collection, and maintenance of catch basin cleaning, and also increased management of stormwater vegetated facilities. There's a new line item in the budget of about $100,000 for a stormwater vegetated facility management that's included in the operations line of business budget. Next slide, please. So the reduction in FTE here reflects a shift of a vacant position to the operations line of business. Materials and services are increasing for business services as a result of an increase in banking and merchant service charges. Those are assessed as a % on our gross revenues, and so they will go up as our revenues increase. They're partially offset by a reduction in discretionary spending for professional services. But the budget does continue to contain resources in professional services to work on the bubble permit and regulatory compliance, as well as to implement WES's new comprehensive strategic plan. Next slide, please. The capital planning and management program, or line of business, reflects a slight increase in FTE count as a result of the operating portions of the 2 new positions. Most of those 2 new positions will be capitalized, and so only a portion of those positions are assigned to the operating budget.
So Aaron, do you want to, maybe explain what it means to capitalize those positions with respect to rates?
Yeah, absolutely. So in In capital planning, the project estimates that are included in WES's capital plan are the total project costs, and that would include any project management that's done internally by WES staff. As WES staff work on projects, they will direct charge their time to that project, and their labor costs become a component of the final project cost and are then capitalized as part of the asset cost and then depreciated over time along with the asset. So a capitalized labor doesn't have any impact on the operating budget and is already accounted for in the CIP. So really doesn't have an impact on rates much at all.
Thank you.
Next slide, please.
Actually, I'm sorry, can we go back one?
Yeah.
Is that poor guy, is he going into a digester with that outfit on?
He was.
He was. Yep.
But thankfully it was just full of water at the time.
Okay.
What we found, Michael, was when we put our we rehabbed the digester as part of our solids project. When we put them back online, we found that we had a leak. And so they have valves in the bottom of the digesters that allow, if the digester is empty, they allow groundwater in so that we don't float a digester. You wouldn't think a digester or a concrete structure of that size could float. And we found that there was that one of the valves through the process of the rehabbing, it wasn't replaced, wasn't identified to be replaced, but we found that we had to replace it. So we sent a diver in before we drained it to see if we could figure out where that leak was coming from to make sure we didn't have a leak in our tank that we weren't aware of.
And
Somebody bought him a beer.
sorry, Michael, I think I stepped on you. What would you say?
Oh, I just said, I hope someone bought him a beer for doing that.
And for the record, we replaced both of the valves, not just the one that broken.
Yep, and the other digester, we went ahead and preemptively replaced those ones as well before that was put back in service.
All right, thanks. Chris, if you could go to the next slide, please. In environmental services line of business, there's really no change in the budget for materials and services as reduced discretionary spending offset increases in some other line items, thanks to the completion of a couple of major planning initiatives in the current year, including the rules and standards update and the storm system master plan. The reduction in FTE reflects a shift to other lines of business as well as a partial vacancy in the permits program. Next slide, please. Continuing through the requirements chart, onto capital outlay. It is the most significant expenditure element of WES's annual budget and reflects a significant increase this next year. As the bar chart on this slide shows, following the completion of the Tri-City Solids Handling Project and the Kellogg Improvements Project in 2020-2021, we've had 2 years of lower capital spending due to staffing constraints, supply chain issues, and a shift to design from construction where for active projects where expenses are generally lower. WES deposited $9.2 million with ODOT for the I-205 Bridge Force Main project last fiscal year, and none of that money has been spent yet. So that money, although it's been deposited for ODOT's project, is not reflected in the expenditures on this chart. Next slide, please.
So Aaron, before you go on to that one,
Yeah.
I just want to say, like, I wish it was by design that we were, timing the market, so to speak. But, we received extremely favorable interest rates when we went out, 0.84% a year or two ago, a couple of years ago. And fortunately, we're not in a big building mode during the really crazy times with respect to increases in construction costs. So just by luck, honestly, we were in a design phase during the worst of it, and things are getting better and good for us. So
Thanks, Greg. Next slide. The 5 projects listed on this slide represent over $38 million of the proposed capital budget, or about 70% of the sewer capital budget. You'll note that the majority of spending next year is on the Tri-City wet weather outfall at $20 million. With the exception of the Willamette Pump Station and Force Main, the major projects in WES's budget are either already under construction or expected to move into the construction phase during the next year. So we are anticipating that spending will dramatically increase compared to the last 2 years. The regional inflow and infiltration cost share agreement reflects increased funding this next year, up to $4.7 million from the existing budget for this year of $2.9 million. We have projects anticipated for the cities of Gladstone, Milwaukee, Oregon City, and West Lynn. So a lot of good participation for that program. Next slide, please. On the surface water side, the storm system master plan was completed during the current fiscal year, and spending is anticipated to increase as new projects commence. Next year's surface water budget includes just under $1 million for continued design work on the Three Creeks Water Quality Project, over $500,000 to address 4 projects for small drainage issues, and 2 projects, the Aldercrest Culvert and Keller Creek Restoration and Clackamas Road Drainage Improvements Project, that will address flooding in WES's service area, as well as improve water quality. Those projects were approved for funding, American Rescue Plan Act funding by the Board of County Commissioners in October 2022. And we're anticipating we'll be receiving ARPA funding equal to the budget for those 2 projects this next year.
Neil?
Does the budget for the Three Creeks project include any assumptions about the grants that WES has been seeking from Metro or other sources?
Great question. And no, it does not. There's been, and Ron, you could chime in on this one too. I think we have 2 grants that WES has been invited to put full applications in for on the Three Creeks Water Quality Project. But the budget does not include any anticipated resources from grant funding, since those funds are uncertain at this time.
Anything else, Neil? Okay.
Thanks. All right, next slide, please. WES's bond covenants require that annual net operating revenues, which is gross revenues less operating expenses, are equal to 120% of annual debt service. So the annual net revenues are represented by the green bar in this chart. Debt service is represented by the black or the dark gray bar in this chart. WES's actual debt coverage for the last 3 fiscal years has ranged from 301%, which was last year, to 461% in 2019-20. We issued new debt in 2021. You can see the debt service goes up dramatically in 2021 from 2020 to 2021. And as a result, our coverage dropped. So we were using a portion of our debt capacity when we issued that debt. We were actually projecting fiscal year 21-22's debt coverage to be closer to 270% after the new debt issuance. We came in at 301% because SDC revenues were so high last year. They were over 11 million, and that's really unusual to see, but that was just due to the timing of payments for large multifamily developments. And that's represented, you can see the net revenues really increase in 21-22. That's all SDC related. We're projecting a more moderate SDC revenue for the current fiscal year, as well as next year's budget. So net revenues reflects those projections. And we're also going to see our debt coverage ratio decline and WES's capacity to issue debt decline. We don't need to issue any debt next year, so that's not really an issue for us right now. In terms of maintaining compliance, we just have to get to the minimum 120%, which we're more than meeting. WES does have a AAA rating affirmed by S&P Global Ratings in February 2021. That's the highest rating that S&P awards, and indicative of strong financial management and good health. Next slide, please. The last and largest component of WES's budget is reserves, and we're budgeting $159.3 million in reserves and ending fund balances next fiscal year. WES has gradually built reserves up over time from a low of around 48 million in 2012-13, which isn't shown on this slide because it only goes back 10 years. That that low was after the last major capital spending push for the expansion at Tri-City. Since then, we've been building up reserves gradually, anticipating the next capital intensive period, which is starting this next year. As mentioned, debt was issued in 2021, which caused a large increase in reserves, and we'll be spending that down this next year. Contingency is the smaller piece of the smaller yellow highlighted portion of requirements in the upper right-hand corner. We're not expecting to spend that contingency, so we've included it in the $159.3 million, but that is available just in case something comes up and we do need to spend it. And next slide, please. WES's rate proposals are aligned with our prior year projections, as well as the projections that were shared during capital improvement planning last year, and advisory committee guidance for steady annual 5% increases to the wastewater treatment and collection rates, and the 6% annual increase recommended to the surface water management rate to fully fund the storm system master plan. Rates are set to cover the costs of providing the service, and that includes operating, maintaining, and building infrastructure and making debt payments related to that infrastructure. In terms of, Mayor McGriff asked a question about, how do we set the rates? How do we ensure that certain rates cover the costs of providing that service? One example is billing. Where possible, we directly trace costs that are related to each primary service to that service. So billing costs are only covered under the local collection component of WES's rate, because the wastewater treatment rate is regional and doesn't, our wastewater treatment only customers have their own billing services. By dollar amounts, the proposed rate increases range from 25 cents to $1.35 by rate component. Customers, depending on the rate zone they live in, will see increases in their monthly rate of anywhere from 25 cents for those that live in rate zone 3 and pay for surface water only, up to $2.05 per month for rate zone 1's retail customers, which receive both wastewater treatment and local collection services. As we'll see on the next slide, the inclusion of the legacy debt component in rate zone 2's rate, it affects only rate zone 2. So it does offset a portion of these base service adjustments. Next slide, please. In addition to the rates that we just saw for WES's primary sewer and surface water services, some customers also pay additional fees related to the legacy debt component and city right-of-way fees. The wastewater legacy debt component covers the costs of the debt that was incurred by Clackamas County Service District Number 1 and transferred to WES before the partnership was formed. Per the partnership agreement, only rate zone 2 ratepayers are responsible for that debt. So the legacy debt component was created to ensure that equity was achieved. Over the next 7 years, to achieve rate harmonization, we are phasing that component out. And we'll be phasing that out through a series of gradual annual reductions in the rate. So next year's legacy debt component is proposed to decrease by $1.35 per month to $10.05 per month. We've also been able to decrease that rate component in prior years a little bit due to growth in the service area. As more customers pay into it, we can collect less from each customer because the annual legacy debt is relatively even. We're able to phase the debt component out faster than we're actually paying off the debt due to the use of rate zone 2 system development charges for the portion of debt service that's eligible. Non-WES fees include right-of-way surcharges that are added to cut some customers' rates based on city right-of-way ordinances. And each city sets their own percentage as a right-of-way fee, and then WES adds that to the base rate, collects that money from the cities, and then remits it back to the cities as a form of pass-through revenue. So we'll see a chart in, I think, 2 slides that shows the service rates for each city and service area. And you'll note that some cities include a right-of-way row surcharge and others don't. Those row surcharges are just based on these percentages as a percent of the overall gross rate in each city. Next slide, please.
Sorry,
So-
Aaron, I just
Yeah.
want to clarify that the cities that have a right-of-way fee, we collect that, for the cities and remit it back to the cities. It's not spread across the district. It's specific to the customers within those 3 cities.
Is that a line item on the customer's bills?
It
You
is
know-
for those customers that we bill directly. So Happy Valley, customers that we bill directly, it does show right away surcharge on there. I don't know about Oregon City or Gladstone.
I'm
From
pretty sure
what-
it is, but it's been a minute.
Yeah, maybe Christopher can look through his filing.
Like through your bills. I'm not a WES customer, so I don't know the answer to that. So I'm just curious if it is spelled out for the customer on their bill.
Yeah, so to build on Greg's comment, we actually do an annual reconciliation of right-of-way fee collections versus right-of-way fee payments to ensure that those amounts are equal over time. We have some year-to-year variances, but we make those up in the next year with minor adjustments to the rates. With the city of Gladstone, we actually adjust the first quarter payment to make up for any differences from the prior fiscal year. So those are the aim there is to be completely revenue neutral. There are no subsidies occurring in other for other ratepayers.
Okay, Mayor Milch?
I just wanted to say that on the Gladstone bill, the right-of-way fee is incorporated into the total amount shown for sewer treatment. So we don't see it separated out on the bill. The customer doesn't see the separate amount, but I think there's a note saying that it is included in there.
Okay, cool.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it was a good question. Next slide, please. So rate harmonization, we've used that term several times tonight. That just means that customers will pay the same for the same services. As you can see at the chart on the upper left, currently retail services in rate zone 1 and 2 and wholesale services in rate zones 1 and 2 are different because of that yellow bar, which represents the legacy debt service fee. That's currently about $11.40 and proposed to decrease to $10.05 per month. As we phase that out through gradual reductions to the rate, customers will be paying the same. And we're anticipating achieving rate harmony in 2031 through those annual gradual reductions. At that point, the rate zone 2 and 1 retail rates will be $60.20 per month, and the rate zones 1 and 2 wholesale rates, which is treatment only, will be $39.25 per month. The phase out of the legacy debt component offsets a portion of rate zone 2's overall increase. So the net dollar and percentage change from rate zone 2's current rate is less than rate zone 1. And we'll see that on the next slide. If you go to the next slide, please. So the table on this slide shows the breakdown in each sewer rate component and how the increase is the same for every customer. However, those customers that are currently paying an additional amount for the legacy debt are going to see an offset to their base adjustment so that their overall percentage change and dollar change are less than rate zone 1. So customers that are paying more will see lower increases until the rates for both rate zones converge and are harmonized in 2031. But key point is that all customers' rate increases are the same for primary services. It's just that the customers with the legacy debt phase out have a portion of that increase offset. And next slide, please. This table shows the breakdown of rates by services and service area, as well as cities, to provide a view of the total monthly bill for each service area and the change from the current monthly bill. As you can see, increases by month range from 25 cents over for rate zone 3, surface water only, up to $2.05 for the full retail unincorporated rate zone 1, which receives both treatment and collection services with no offsetting reduction of the legacy debt component. And next slide, please. In conjunction with the budget, we update a 10-year financial forecast to ensure that resources are adequate to cover expenses over the long term and that WES can continue providing services for the foreseeable future. As we don't just need resources for services next year, since services are really required. So this forecasting allows us to project monthly rates and develop a rate plan with reasonable, predictable annual rate increases that keep pace with costs and allow for the needed capital investment. The chart on this slide condenses WES's 10-year forecast into a single visual representation and shows 5% projected annual rate increases for wastewater treatment and collection rates, 6% increases to the surface water rate zone 2 rate, as well as growth in the district. That's represented by the revenue increasing. That's the green line there. The chart also shows the expenses for each year by the bar charts. Green is our operating expenses, and as you can see, those increase steadily. Gray is debt service. That doesn't increase until we start to issue new debt in fiscal year 27-28. Capital expenses fluctuate from year to year and are represented by the light blue line. WES's existing reserves are represented by that dark or by the black dashed line. As you can see, we'll be using those reserves and spending those down to fund the capital plan for the first 4 years before we start to issue new debt in fiscal year 27-28. The reserves level off at a certain point when we are down to the minimum target around fiscal year 2030. And then they start to increase to keep pace with our reserve target for 60 days operating expenses. Next slide, please. We conduct a rate survey every year just to kind of test where WES falls with respect to other providers in the region. And as you can see on this chart, WES's rates currently compare pretty favorably to other service providers. Most of our rates are below the average. The rates for some of the cities in WES's service area are currently above the average. The difference between rate zone 1 and rate zone 2's retail rate between 40.75 and 52.15 on this chart is just the legacy debt component. So those are the same services, but their rates are different. Over the next 7 years, as you saw on the rate harmonization slide, WES's retail rate will increase from 40.75 in rate zone 1 to 60, a little over $60, and from 52.15 in rate zone 2 to that same $60. We're anticipating with those increases that WES's rates are still going to be at or below the regional average, as all these other agencies are looking at increases similar to WES's annually to keep pace with rises in operating costs as well as capital investment. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Aaron, I would add,
Yeah.
it's public information. Oak Lodge Water Services, they're in the middle of the left side. They're looking at or contemplating a 37% rate increase this year for their sanitary sewer services. So they're all going to go up. We think that we have a really good understanding of what our needs are long-term and what our rates are going to be long-term, barring any kind of crazy happening. We think that we're going to be very, very competitive for a very long time. So,
Greg, didn't Oak Lodge go a number of years without rate increases? And we're kind of proud of themselves for having no rate increases, and now they're kind of making up for that. That was my understanding. It's a bit of a delayed. I like the 5% a year, steady as she goes numbers for us, so that we don't have those sticker shock events happening. So
yes, yes, that did happen, and honestly, that did happen with WES, the Tri-City Service District in particular, back in the early 2000s. I don't know if,
long time ago, right.
Long time ago, and so there was a 0% rate increases for 4 or 5 years, followed by double digit for multiple years.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, Christopher.
Yeah, just a quick question, Aaron. On the previous slide, you had mentioned kind of long-term, honing in on a target reserve of 60 days. And I was just curious, is there like an average number of what you expect that to be? How many millions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me do the math real quick. So that's about $5 million currently in the operating funds, $4 million on the sewer side and $1 million on the surface water side. And that will increase 5% per year to keep pace with increases in operating expenses. When we do long-term financial planning, we build that increase in reserves in to ensure that we're not eroding those as operating costs increase.
Okay, thank you.
That was a good question. Thank you. On the surface water side, as you can see, WES's rates are the lowest and third lowest in the region at $4.95 for rate zone 3 retail and $8.15 for rate zone 2 retail. Rate zone 2's rate, we expect to get closer to the average for the area as we begin to implement the surface water master plan and see increased capital spending. So those 6% rate increases that we're proposing for long range planning for rate zone 2's retail surface water rate will bring that closer in line with other service providers in the area.
Michael?
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what Greg said. 2 years ago, was my first time on being the budget committee, and actually one of the county commissioners thought it was a bad idea to have a rate increase, albeit very small rate increase because of COVID, but the other 4 commissioners followed WES's recommendations to have a very meager rate increase. And I think, building on what Greg said, that's what's been keeping us out of trouble.
I would agree.
Thank you, Michael. That's exactly it. Over the National Association of Clean Water Agencies puts out a cost of clean water index every year. And over the last 17 years, wastewater costs have doubled. So it's not just a WES agency issue, it's a nationwide issue where rates have to keep pace with increases in costs. We've seen an increase of 40% in the construction cost index over the last 10 years. And we're always having to increase our capital spending to renew assets and replace existing infrastructure as well as build new capacity. So those annual increases, they really help us avoid rate shock, which is something that we don't want to do with double-digit increases.
And then Erin, we have just a little over 10 minutes. So are we on schedule?
Yes,
Okay.
we're narrowing in on the last few slides.
Perfect.
Thank you for the time check. Next slide, please. We understand that even moderate rate increases can impact some customers more heavily than others. And WES does have a low-income discount program where we offer a 50% reduction in sewer services and pass that discount on to our partner cities. We have fairly low utilization of this discount program currently, and part of that's due to restrictive eligibility criteria that we're happy to be sharing is no longer going to be an issue. Thanks to the recently adopted rules and standards, eligibility is expanding. You can see the chart on the right shows WES's existing criteria, which is the green line, and unfortunately it got cut off in the legend. And then the new criteria for our program, which is the blue line. Our annual household income limits are going up and they're going to scale with household size. They didn't scale with household size beyond 2 in the current eligibility criteria. So that really restricted eligibility for larger households, which is not something we wanted to do. It was just like embedded in the current rules and no longer is. We implemented the federal low-income household water assistance program in May of last year. We were really excited about that program because it's ratepayer assistance that doesn't have any impact on rates. It's not additional money that WES has to make up through collections from other ratepayers. It was completely free federal money that was that acted as a payment to each customer's bill. Unfortunately, that program is being discontinued in September at the federal level, and we're not sure if there'll be state funding to fill in the gap at this time. So we are going to be exploring some other customer assistance programs over the next couple of years, and we'll be bringing ideas back to the advisory committee for your input and consideration.
Christopher?
Yeah, I'm really happy to see that you're expanding the low income discount program. I think that's phenomenal. You mentioned low access of the program. Is part of that at all challenges due to people just learning about the program? And I guess I'm curious, are you expanding how you sort of advertise and share that this program exists?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, we try to advertise it, so it's on our website. If anyone goes onto our website, they'll read it. We also put bill notes on our bills occasionally, but we haven't done targeted outreach, and that's one of the items that we'll be looking at this next year to try to increase eligibility or increase utilization rather. There's also some really good models that other utilities have used where they've partnered with agencies, nonprofits that have access and outreach efforts already in place for low-income households, and that can really expand who we reach with this information. One of the challenges that we've had is we have to bill property owners, and so the low-income discount program doesn't apply in a lot of instances for renters who are often the lowest income households. The LIWA program did, and we really liked it for that. And so we're going to be looking at ways we might be able to reach non-owners too. So more to come on that, but we're thinking about it a lot.
Thank you.
All right, next slide, please. We use construction cost indexes to propose rate adjustments to WES's system development charges. The engineering news construction cost index is the one that we use, and it's based on a basket of goods that's included down below. It's a really big basket with all the cement, steel, and lumber. But just like the CPI, adjustments there reflect increases in the actual costs of the underlying goods that go into that index. For the last 2 years, we've seen very high increases. 2022 ended at 7.2%. March 2023 is at 3%. We've seen decreases for the last 4 months. We're now at just over 2.2% with preliminary May results, which is really promising to start to see those costs come down. We are proposing an increase to the SDC charge of 3% next year, which would bring the sewer SDC up to $8,860 and the surface water SDC up to $240 for each new connection. And next slide, please. In terms of next steps, advisory committee recommendations will be shared with the budget committee this next Monday. Our budget committee meeting is Monday, first thing in the morning. We're first up for the county. The meeting starts at 8:45 a.m. There'll be remarks from Chair Smith at 8:30. The meeting will be at the Public Services Building on the Red Soils campus, and that meeting will be an opportunity for any public input, including folks that are outside of the advisory committee, stakeholders, ratepayers, to provide input on the budget for the budget committee to discuss the budget and then to vote on approving the budget and moving it forward for formal adoption. Formal adoption will be taking place tentatively on June 22nd. And that's also when rate increases would be considered. Rate increases are considered separately from the budget, but they are included in the budget request in the form of revenue. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, we'd like to request a motion to move the budget forward to the budget committee this next Monday for their consideration of approval.
Thank you, Erin. Before I request a motion, does anyone else have any questions that did not get addressed during the presentation? There were great questions, and I know that there were several questions ahead of time that Erin already addressed. So hearing none. Now, again, this is just a motion to move this forward to the budget committee. The budget committee is the body that actually brings this before the BCC. So I'm just looking for a motion to move it forward to the budget committee.
So moved. Greg DiLoretto.
We have a motion from Greg D. Do I have
I'll
a second?
second the motion. Michael Milch.
Mayor Milch seconds. Any other questions before we take the vote? And I'll do hands raised either on the screen or thumbs up on the screen. If that's okay, do you think that's okay, Chris? It's our official, unofficial way of doing this. So
It's okay because it's not it's like
Exactly.
the minutes. Is it?
exactly. Okay, very good. Very good. It looks like motion passes. Very good. Thank you. Great presentation. You know, I have to say, I've sat through a lot of budget presentations, and this is as complex as this is. It's one of the most easiest to understand for a layman. I just think it's fantastic the way you do the presentation, Erin. I really appreciate it.
Are the slides on our the site somewhere?
Yes.
There. Okay, thank you.
It's very good. It's very good, right? Yeah.
Thank you for that feedback. And we really do incorporate any suggestions you guys have for improvement. That's really helped us to improve our budget each year. So please do feel free to offer suggestions. I know Christopher has given us a couple of suggestions for additions to the budget document that we'll be releasing in the final adopted version. So thank you all. We really appreciate your engagement in this process.
Very good.
Is it best, I know time's kind of the essence, to just maybe email you anything else, Erin, or what's the?
Yes, please. That would be
Okay.
perfect.
And I just wanted to add, very impressed. You always do a wonderful job. I think Wes does a fantastic job putting this together. It's incredibly complex. In this year, I didn't bring out my volumes from past years, but I think the readability has improved. You do a very nice job. So thank you. It shows.
And Erin worked hard on that this year. So yes, I'm so glad that she's getting that recognition. Yeah.
Very good. All right. And we're on schedule too. Yay. I love that. Very good. So I'm going to move on to Shelley for the Clean Water Exchange 2.0 announcement.
Yes, I just have a quick call to action. But first, I just want to say, so the Clean Water Exchange 1.0 that we conducted in 2021, just to add context, that when we listen, we do take action. One of the things we learned is that our regional story was complex and hard to understand, and that our financial picture was even more fuzzy. And what happens when people can't understand something clearly? They start to sort of assume there's a lack of transparency. Well, Erin took that charge so seriously. And I just want to say, I mean, and the compliments here tonight, Erin, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for listening. And we still have lots of opportunity because we're still hearing new threads and information coming in, but thank you, Erin, so much. So now we're into Clean Water Exchange 2023 2.0, and we're expanding. So for those who didn't have the time to participate in the focus group or the survey yet, I'll say yet with the survey, I want to just give you an idea of sort of the two key themes we're talking about this round. One of them, we continue to want to understand what could or should WES be doing to better serve our customers and stakeholders. We want to continue improving. And we've been getting a lot of really great recommendations and digging deeper than we even learned in the first version. But the second part is a little bit different, right? Because in the first version, we were really focused on ourselves. We wanted people to understand who we are, what we do, why we matter, how we can improve in telling our story. And then we sort of put a teaser out there, and what could or should we be doing with you? Would you like to be a part of this? And what we heard is that a clean water future isn't possible without partnership and collaboration. And so the second half of these focus groups really focuses on the clean water challenges at hand and what WES could or should be doing in partnership with our community to safeguard that clean water future. And the ideas are just, I mean, I'm looking at our chair and vice chair and many of you who have been participating, and would you say that the feedback we're getting is pretty impressive? There's both some sort of what Diane and I would call sort of the V8 moment. Why aren't we doing that? That is so easy. Why don't we think about it? But that's why we do listening sessions, because sometimes we can't see what's right in front of us. But some things, folks, when I report back to you at our next meeting, they're hard because collaboration across government agencies, across community agencies, we all aspire to it, but it's hard work and it really takes commitment. So I'm excited to be able to bring back what we heard. And I don't know, Brian Johnson, is he still on the call?
Yes.
Is he still on the call?
Yeah, I'm here.
Brian, this was my second year, my second year that I interviewed Brian, but he did something a little different for me this year. He couldn't attend the focus group, so we had another one-on-one, but it included a tour. And Brian, I just want to say thank you, because that tour, going from hearing to seeing, really gave me context in today's focus group settings on what we could or should be doing in collaboration. So I just want to thank all of you for your participation, and then give one more call to action. The Clean Water Exchange is still going. So if you haven't taken the online survey, please share it. Anyone who cares about the future of clean water can take it, but there is a special component in there for those who identify as a customer. And this is really an opportunity for our customers to evaluate our work and help us improve. So it's not just about making people feel good. It's not just about educating people on who we are, what we do, but it helps us improve our work. So even if you took the focus group and you're a customer, could you still take this? There's another opportunity for us to continue learning. And then hopefully, if time allows, at the next advisory committee, Madam Chair, I'll give a short report on what we learned.
Yeah, I was a little surprised in the focus groups. There were things that came up that I thought people were more aware of that they're not. And I think then that just means we need to do a better job of getting things out there that I thought were out there. So it's or make the information more accessible if it's not. So I learned a lot. It was very good. All right, good, Shelley. Any questions on that? I hope everyone takes part in the survey, because it really is beneficial for all of us to know. Again, I'm not a WES customer, so I really dream of having sewer one of these days instead of being on a septic, but just saying, it would be nice to move on to the next world. Yes, and then we're going to move on to the WES Advisory Committee report outs. And I know Greg mentioned some of these earlier, as did Shelley, the Green Roof Tour. There's other things I know people have taken part in. Greg D and I both did the focus groups. I know I'm signed up for the Water Reuse Summit that's coming up in June. Anyone else have any things they've partaken in that they want to report out? Christopher, we're wondering if you have a green roof on your building in downtown Portland.
No, we don't. I don't know why, but they've never really, no.
Because they mentioned the Portland public building that we were like, we wonder if that's where Christopher works.
They actually, the Portland building might have a very small one, but we can't access it, I guess is what I was initially thinking. A lot of times they'll have eco roofs that you can use, or it's a place for you to kind of have a Zen moment or relax, or maybe eat your lunch. And it's not that.
Okay. All right. All right, Mayor Milch.
I just wanted to say, a couple of weeks ago, our local elementary school had a career day, and I was invited to participate. And rather than talk about the professional careers I've had in the past, I chose to talk about being a mayor and all the jobs that are involved in operating a city, a lot of which includes water-related infrastructure issues. And the amazing thing to me was that I spoke to about 4 different classes. In almost every class I attended, there was at least one student who had a parent who was involved in some aspect of the whole process of either, creating clean drinking water from the beginning by taking it out of the river and processing it, or processing the water that goes back down the drain at the end that WES does here locally. And one of the things I learned, the last class I was in, there was a student who I guess had a parent who worked at the treatment center here at Tri-Cities, and noted that the water that is returned to the river after it's been processed is cleaner than the water that was taken out of the river to begin with to be filtered and turned into drinking water. And I think students, in that, hearing all that discussion, they have the same kind of appreciation for what we do that we hope our customers do. And to see that at an elementary school level and to have that awareness brought up there was just exciting for me to feel like I'm a part of that process. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Those are our future leaders. That's great. Shelley?
Yeah, so I just wanted to give a couple of reminders. Speaking of Solve, I'll be sending this out by email, but since you're all here, we have 2 Solve events coming up in June. On June 8th, we'll be doing a cleanup at 3 Creeks from 9 to 11. And then on June 10th, we will be in the city of Milwaukee. We'll be having it's called a Watershed Discovery Day and Cleanup at our Kellogg Creek Park. So 9 to 11 will be the cleanup. 11 to 2, we'll have an educational event taking place and with partners like the Johnson Creek Watershed Council, World Salmon Council, DPAVE, and many, many others. So we hope you come and visit us. So I'll send out a reminder.
Thank you. I'll need that since I wasn't able to make it today. Christopher.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly mention, I know we said it last time, but there is going to be a lunch and learn coming up. It would be the first of the 2 for the year. So the first one is going to be May 31st. So it's over lunch. So it's from noon to 1, sort of come as you are. It'll be virtual. So hopefully the goal is that wherever you are, you're able to tune in for 1 hour. The first 5 or so minutes will be sort of a soft re-entry or entry, sort of transitioning from whatever the heck you were doing right before that. Then there will be a presentation from WES staff for approximately 30 minutes. And then there's going to be roughly, I think, a 20-minute kind of Q&A session afterwards. And so that can be certainly organic. And then the last 5 or so minutes, I think, will be kind of a wrap up and then allowing you time and space to transition back to whatever your day looks like. And the topic will be climate resiliency.
I'm excited for that. Excellent. Greg D.
Yeah, I wanted to share with the group that I had the opportunity on April 20th, and I shared with a few of the others. I appeared on ABC News. It was quite an in-depth report they did on water infrastructure in America. Actually, some of the quotes made it onto Good Morning America the next day. So it was an opportunity for me to reach a national audience about the need to invest in our nation's infrastructure. It was a lot of fun. They came out to my house. They had an ABC film crew here, and my house is on TV somewhere. And it turned out to be it was a lot of fun, and it was quite in depth. So they were doing it as part of Earth Day.
I watched that, Greg, and you had a couple of real salient points that really hit home with me, and that is how much people are willing to spend for a bottle of water when they go to the store, or in the, as you said, the hotel room in Las Vegas, that's $10 a bottle. You know, people are like, yeah, I'll pay that. Sure. It's funny money, right? And, but yet, you know, we don't pay much more than that a month for some of our water bills. So yeah, it was a great interview they did. And anyone else? Ron, I will email you. I do know of a way to reach out to the low income people that it's something that I know that Sunrise Water does, and it costs nothing, and it has to do with the county, and it might be through a nonprofit, but I do have some information on that.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else before we? Oh, it's 7:29. Such great timing, right? Love it. Greg, any last words?
Just thank you so much. I've been at this as a director for like 8 years, and I just feel like we've come to a really good place. I appreciate our staff so much and our advisory committee. It's a powerhouse. We're doing great, and I'm just so thankful. So thank you.
And good luck, budget committee,
Yes.
on Monday. Thank you guys for signing up for that. I'm glad it's not me. If there's nothing else, this meeting is adjourned. Good night, everyone.